Scary and true stories about being alone at home. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. Story 1. There exist places within us that remain eternally connected to primordial fear. This fear whispers through the walls of empty houses, inhabits shadows that move at the corners of our eyes, and manifests in that frozen sensation that something is wrong, long before our conscious mind processes the danger. But what happens when the only being capable of articulating this premonition possesses no human voice to warn us? My name is Sophia. What I'm about to share with you happened when I was 15, on a night that permanently altered my understanding of instincts, protection, and the invisible barriers between safety and peril. We lived in Lakewood, a tranquil suburb of Denver, Colorado. One of those communities where houses maintain a respectful distance from each other, separated by white fences and well-tended gardens. The kind of neighborhood where mothers allowed their children to play in the street until twilight and where neighbors recognized each other's cars. Our house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, facing a small area of preserved woodland that always cast long shadows across our yard in autumn afternoons. A two-story house with a basement, with that revisited colonial structure so common in American suburbs, neither too old to have disturbing previous histories, nor modern enough to offer the sensation of complete security that triple-paned glass and sophisticated alarm systems promise. Allie entered our lives when I was 12, a German Shepherd Labrador mix, rescued from a local shelter. Golden fur with darker patches on her muzzle and back, deeply amber eyes that seemed to contain more wisdom than any animal should possess. From the first day, we established a connection that transcended the simple relationship between human and pet. Allie wasn't just my companion. She was my protector, my silent confidant, the guardian who slept at the foot of my bed during stormy nights. Perhaps that's why I should have paid more attention when her behavior began to change that week in October. It all began on a Tuesday. My parents had left for a work commitment that would extend until late. My father was an architect and my mother an interior decorator. They often attended clients together at evening presentations. It wasn't the first time I'd been left alone at home, and at 15, I considered myself perfectly capable of taking care of myself for a few hours. The sun had set not long ago, leaving the sky in that peculiar deep blue tone that precedes complete darkness. I was in the living room, reclined on the sofa with my laptop, alternating between homework and conversations with friends, when I noticed Allie suddenly raise her head from her favorite rug near the fireplace. Her ears moved forward, then backward, like antennas tuning into a distant signal. Her body, previously relaxed, stiffened into a state of alertness, without yet demonstrating evident alarm. "What is it, girl?" I asked distractedly, without completely diverting my attention from the screen. Allie didn't respond, obviously, but slowly rose, moving with deliberation to the side window that overlooked the yard and the woods beyond. She positioned herself there, perfectly motionless, eyes fixed on some point in the growing darkness outside. I initially ignored it. Probably a squirrel, or perhaps the neighbor's cat invading our territory. Allie had always been territorial, though never aggressive. It was only when she began to growl, a low, constant, almost subsonic sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, that I finally diverted my attention to what was happening. Allie's growl wasn't that explosive, sound directed at mail carriers or pizza delivery people. It was deeper, more primitive, as if emanating not from her throat but from some ancestral place in her DNA that recognized dangers humans had forgotten how to identify. I stood up and approached her, trying to discern what provoked such a reaction. The darkness outside had solidified, turning the yard into a canvas of indistinct shadows. The woodland trees formed a black barrier against the night sky, their silhouettes swaying gently in the breeze. "There's nothing there, girl," I said, stroking her head, feeling the tense muscles beneath my fingers. That's when I realized her fur was completely bristled along her spine. At that moment, a movement caught my peripheral attention, something at the edge of the woods where the trees met our carefully trimmed lawn, a shadow that seemed to move independently of the others, shifting laterally before retreating into the denser darkness. Allie's growl intensified, transforming into a sharp, urgent bark. She pressed her body against the glass as if she could pass through it to confront whatever was out there. I instinctively retreated from the window, my heart accelerating. "It's just an animal," I murmured to myself. "Maybe a deer or a coyote." But something in Allie's reaction, in the intensity of her focus, suggested that what she perceived wasn't part of the usual local fauna. I checked again that all doors were locked, an automatic self-preservation reflex. Our house had 3 entrances, the main one in front, a side one that led to the garage, and the back door that opened onto a small wooden deck. I confirmed, the locks and curtains creating an illusory barrier between our illuminated world and the vigilant darkness outside. "Let's go upstairs, Allie," I called, wanting distance from the ground floor windows that suddenly seemed to expose us too much. Allie hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon her vigilance post. When she finally followed me upstairs, she did so constantly looking back, as if fearing something might follow her. In my room, I tried to resume my routine, forcing myself to focus on the mathematical equations I needed to solve for the next day. Allie lay near the door, not in her usual position at the foot of my bed, but like a sentinel, eyes fixed on the hallway. It was approximately 20 minutes later when I heard the first knock, 3 distinct, deliberate taps on the front door. I froze, the pencil suspended over the notebook. We weren't expecting anyone. I checked my cell phone, 8:47 at night. Too late for deliveries, too early for my parents to return. Allie rose instantly, her body vibrating with controlled tension. But surprisingly, she didn't run downstairs barking as she normally would with visitors. Instead, she positioned herself at the top of the stairs, growling softly, the fur along her spine forming a bristled crest. An icy sensation spread through my stomach. If it was a legitimate visitor, why wasn't Allie reacting normally? If it wasn't, what explained her hesitation to confront? I approached my bedroom window that overlooked the front of the house. From there, I could partially see our porch and the main entrance. The exterior light illuminated a small yellowish circle, beyond which the darkness seemed denser than it should be. There were no visible parked cars, no silhouette on the porch. More knocks, this time at the side door near the garage. The same sequence of 3 measured, deliberate taps. My breathing accelerated. How could someone move so quickly from the front to the side of the house without me seeing them through the window? "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice sounding thinner and more tremulous than I intended. No response, just heavy, almost tangible silence. I grabbed my cell phone, dialing my father's number with trembling fingers. Voicemail. I tried my mother. The same result. They were probably in their presentation, phones silenced. I sent text messages to both. Someone's knocking on the doors. I'm scared. Please come home soon. A new sound made my blood freeze. Knocks on the back door. The most distant one in the house, the one that led to the deck and beyond it, to the yard that met the woods. The same cadence. The same 3 methodical taps. Whoever our visitor was, they had completely circled the house. Allie's reaction changed dramatically. Her growling transformed into furious barking, no longer contained but explosive, frantic. She ran from the top of the stairs to my room and back, as if trying to protect multiple entry points simultaneously. "I'm going to call the police," I announced aloud, to whoever was out there and to myself, trying to infuse courage into my trembling voice. I began dialing 911, but hesitated with my finger over the call button. What would I say exactly? That someone was knocking on the doors of my house? There was no concrete threat, no attempt at forced entry, just knocks, however disturbing they were. It was then that I heard, or believed I heard, a new sound that defied any rational explanation. Footsteps in the basement. Slow, dragged, as if someone, or something, was moving heavily on the concrete floor 2 stories below us. The basement door was in the laundry area, adjacent to the kitchen. It remained constantly locked, the key kept in a kitchen drawer. To access it, someone would first need to enter the house. Allie heard it too. Her head turned sharply toward the eye. Stares, ears fully erect, body trembling with absolute tension. "It can't be real," I whispered to myself. "We're imagining things." But the sounds continued. Heavy footsteps followed by a metallic dragging like tools being moved or touched. I pressed the call button, 911 finally connecting. What's your emergency?" The operator's voice sounded surreally calm in contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. "I think there's someone in my house," I whispered, fearing being heard by whoever was in the basement. "I'm alone with my dog. Someone was knocking on all the doors, and now I hear noises in the basement. Can you confirm your address?" asked the operator, as I provided the information between shallow, accelerated breaths. "We'll send a patrol car immediately. Are you in a safe location inside the house?" "I'm in my bedroom, 2nd floor. Stay where you are. Lock the door if possible and don't try to investigate the sounds. Officers will arrive in approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. An eternity when each second seemed stretched by the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I hung up and sent another message to my parents, informing them that I had called the police. Then, following an impulse I can't rationally explain even today, I locked my bedroom door and pushed my desk to block it. The 8 minutes transformed into 10, each second marked by Allie's increasingly frantic barking and my heart hammering against my ribs. The sounds in the basement had ceased, replaced by a silence that seemed even more threatening. That's when Allie did something she had never done before. She abruptly stopped barking and ran to the other end of the hallway, where my parents' bedroom was located. She began furiously scratching at the closed door, whining with desperate urgency. Impelled by a curiosity stronger than fear, I removed the desk and followed her. My parents' bedroom was dark, illuminated only by the hallway light that entered when I opened the door. Allie darted inside, heading directly to the built-in closet on the opposite wall. She scratched at the closet door with such intensity that her nails left marks on the lacquered wood. She whined, barked, then looked at me with an expression that transcended her canine nature. There was urgency, purpose, deliberate communication in her eyes. I slowly approached and opened the closet door. Allie immediately pushed her muzzle between the hanging clothes, directing herself to the back, where my father kept a small safe. The safe where he kept his gun. My father, an ex-police officer who had become an architect after an on-duty injury, legally owned a pistol that he kept secure in that safe. He had never shown it to me, though he had explained its existence and the importance of never touching it. But Allie seemed to be begging me to access it. How did she know about the existence of the gun? How could she comprehend its purpose or location? Before I could fully process these questions, I heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass on the lower floor. A window. Someone was trying to enter. Not through the door, but forcing entry through a window. The sound was followed by movements. Footsteps on the ground floor, no longer in the basement, moving quickly through the living room toward the stairs. Panic completely took over. I retreated to the hallway, pulling Allie with me, and ran back to my room. I repositioned the desk against the door with renewed force from terror, piling my chair and other objects to strengthen the improvised barricade. Allie positioned herself between me and the door, her body a living barrier of protection, tense muscles ready to attack. Her growling had returned, deeper and more threatening than ever. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, each step announcing the inexorable approach of whoever had invaded our house. Then something unusual happened. Allie stopped growling. Her ears moved forward, her posture changing from defensive to alert. Her tail, previously rigid, began to wag slightly, and then my father's voice called from the hallway, "Sophia? Are you there? The police are downstairs." A wave of relief so intense it almost made me faint coursed through my body. Tears instantly welled up. "Dad?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Is it really you?" "Yes, dear, it's us. We received your messages and came running. Everything's okay now." I frantically removed the barricade and opened the door. My parents were there, along with 2 uniformed police officers. I threw myself into my father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably while Allie circled around us, still alert, but visibly relieved. "We found the kitchen window broken," explained one of the officers. "It appears someone tried to force entry, but may have been frightened off by the sirens when we arrived." The subsequent investigation revealed disturbing details that only increased my gratitude for Allie's supernatural intuition. The kitchen window had been broken from outside in, with tool marks indicating deliberate attempt at forced entry. Footprints were found in the garden, completely circling the house, explaining the sequential knocks on all doors. Whoever it was had studied us, tested our reactions, evaluated the presence of alarms or guard dogs. Most disturbing, however, was what they found in the basement. The basement door remained locked, the key still in the kitchen drawer. But when the police went down to inspect, they discovered that the small ventilation window, a narrow rectangle near the ceiling, just large enough for a very thin person to pass through, had been manipulated. The external protective bars had been removed days before, the screws carefully removed and replaced to disguise the alteration. Inside the basement, footprints in the dust indicated that someone had been there, moving among my father's tool shelves. An area under the stairs seemed to have been reorganized, with displaced boxes forming a space that could easily shelter a person. The investigators' conclusion was clear and disturbing. Someone had meticulously planned to enter our house, possibly hiding in the basement during the day to emerge at night. The knocks on the doors were probably a test. Checking if there were people in the house, if they were alone, how they would react. When he realized I was alone with just a dog, the intruder decided to proceed with his plan, returning to the basement to prepare before coming up. The simultaneous arrival of the police and my parents frustrated whatever was planned. There have been similar invasions in the neighboring county, explained the detective who took the case. Isolated residences, families with teenagers or mothers alone. The intruder usually spends days observing, learning routines, preparing. When I asked what happened in these other invasions, the detective exchanged glances with my parents and softened his tone. The important thing is that nothing happened here, thanks to your dog and your quick decision to call for help. It was only weeks later, researching on my own, that I discovered the complete truth. 3 families had been attacked in the previous months. In each case, the intruder had entered the houses days before the main attack, hiding in basements or attics, observing, learning, preparing. The victims had suffered extreme violence. None survived to describe the attacker. They never captured the man who tried to invade our house that night. The fingerprints weren't in any database, and the footprints in the garden corresponded to a common shoe size, impossible to specifically identify. In the months that followed, our family implemented extensive security measures, professional alarm system, cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks on all windows, including the small basement opening which was permanently sealed. But no technology offered the comfort that Allie's presence provided. How did she know? How did she perceive the presence of someone who wasn't even visible? How did she comprehend the imminent danger when there was still no concrete manifestation of threat? Even more impressive, how did she know exactly where my father kept his gun, an object she had never seen, in a location that had never been opened in her presence? Animal behavior specialists we consulted offered partial explanations. Canine sense of smell can detect odors imperceptible to humans. Dogs possess sensitivity to alterations in sound and movement patterns. Protective instincts can manifest in seemingly prescient ways, but nothing completely explained Allie's behavior that night. She began sleeping exclusively in my room after the incident, no longer at the foot of the bed, but strategically positioned between me and the door. For years, she maintained a silent vigilance that only relaxed when the entire family was gathered and safe. Sometimes, even today, I wake up in the middle of the night in my own apartment, years and miles distant from that house, and believe I hear Allie's characteristic sound, the soft dragging of paws across the floorboards, checking. Perimeters standing guard. Allie passed away 5 years ago, after a long life for her size and breed. In her final moments, as I stroked her already graying fur, she looked at me with those same deep amber eyes that seemed to contain knowledge beyond human reach. Science can explain many things: the extraordinary sensory apparatus of dogs, their evolution as protective companions of humans, the biochemical oxytocin bonds that connect us. But a deeper mystery remains in this connection between species, something that transcends purely biological explanations. Some ancestral communication that endures since the times when humans and wolves began their unlikely alliance around primitive fires, each species compensating for the vulnerabilities of the other. I keep Allie's collar hanging near my door to this day, a tangible reminder that sometimes our safety depends on languages we don't consciously speak, on senses we don't possess, on connections we don't fully understand. Last month, I adopted a new dog, a mixed breed from the local shelter with golden patches that vaguely resembled Allie's pattern. On the first night in my apartment, he did something extraordinary. He walked directly to the wall where Allie's collar hangs, sat below it, and looked at me with an almost human expression of recognition. Afterward, he methodically traversed each room, inspecting corners, doors, and windows before finally lying down near my bed, exactly in the position that Allie always preferred. Scientists would say it's coincidence, that I'm projecting behaviors and memories onto him that belong to another animal, another time. Perhaps they're right. But when I wake up startled in the middle of the night and find him already alert, attentively watching the door, I sometimes wonder if there exists some continuity in the guardians we encounter throughout life. If somehow those who protect us find ways to remain vigilant, even beyond the limits we consider possible. When we feel that sudden shiver of fear without apparent cause, when we feel compelled to check a door we're certain we locked, when our animals react to presences we cannot detect, perhaps these are the true communications we should learn to hear. Story 2. Home should be our sanctuary. But what happens when the walls meant to protect us harbor something we never invited in? This is the story of how a young man discovered that the line between safety and terror can be as thin as a locked door. Suburbs of Portland, Oregon, fall of 2017. A 2-story Victorian house with a basement, painted in faded blue tones, surrounded by trees whose yellowed leaves silently fell onto the neglected lawn. The kind of residence that tells stories through its creaking wood and corners darkened by time. The Matthews family had acquired the property just over a decade ago. 3 bedrooms on the upper floor, a spacious living room and kitchen on the ground floor, and a basement that had been converted into a semi-independent apartment for the eldest son, Daniel, now 24. The basement had a separate entrance, allowing Daniel a certain autonomy while finishing his graduate studies, a convenience for parents who frequently traveled for work, leaving the house in their son's care. That particularly cold October, the Matthews embarked on a 3-week trip to visit relatives on the other side of the country. Daniel remained, satisfied with the temporary solitude that would allow him to focus on his thesis and occasionally entertain friends without concern. The first week passed without incident. Daniel established a comfortable routine, waking up late, working on his thesis during the day, occasionally going upstairs to check the main house or grab something from the kitchen. The nights usually ended with friends, drinks, and conversations that extended into the early morning. It was after one of these nights, when he returned home alone at 3:17 a.m. He checked the clock as he stumbled through the back entrance, that something imperceptibly shifted in the environment. Daniel couldn't name the sensation. A subtle alteration in the atmosphere, like when you enter a room where someone has recently been. An almost imperceptible displacement of objects, though nothing was visibly out of place. A residual presence that seemed to permeate the air. He attributed the feeling to alcohol and fatigue, had a glass of water, and headed down to the basement. The hallway leading to the stairs seemed strangely longer that night, the shadows denser in the corners, as if observing his passage. Already in his bed, at the exact moment consciousness began to yield to sleep, he heard the first sound, a distinct creak in the floorboards upstairs, like a careful, calculated step of someone trying not to make noise. The footsteps continued for approximately 3 minutes, slow, deliberate, crossing the living room toward the kitchen, then returning. Daniel remained motionless, his racing heart contradicting the lethargic movements of his inebriated thoughts. "It's just the house settling," he muttered to himself, an explanation that sounded plausible. Old houses frequently creaked and groaned during temperature changes, especially at night when the air cooled. A rational, scientific, comforting explanation. Then the footsteps began to descend the internal staircase connecting the kitchen to the basement, each step announcing itself with a sharp groan of the old wood. 1, 2, 3, 4. Measured. Methodical. Daniel sat up abruptly in bed, the intoxication dissipating under the rush of adrenaline. There was no longer any way to deny it. Someone was in the house. Questions fired in his mind. A thief? An intruder? How had they entered? All doors were locked, he was certain. The footsteps stopped in front of his door. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. Daniel could sense the presence on the other side, a density in the air that seemed to pulse against the wood. Then softly, the doorknob began to turn. To the right, to the left, testing if it was unlocked. Daniel silently thanked his paranoid habit of always locking the door before sleeping, even when alone in the house. After several attempts, the footsteps slowly retreated, up the stairs, returning to the upper floor. Daniel remained awake, motionless, until dawn, when fatigue finally overcame him. Upon waking hours later with the sun already high, Daniel questioned his memories of the previous night. Had he imagined it all? Could alcohol explain auditory hallucinations, couldn't it? He cautiously left his room and inspected the basement. Nothing out of place. He climbed the stairs to check the main house, where everything also appeared normal. He checked windows and doors, all secure, with no signs of forced entry. Gradually, the rational explanation solidified in his mind. He was exhausted, drunk, his mind had played tricks. He decided to avoid drinks for a few days, adjust his sleep cycle, return to a productive routine. The thesis wouldn't write itself, after all. During the day, the house was bright, welcoming, familiar. The events of the early morning seemed like a distant nightmare, a story he would tell friends with self-deprecating laughter. But then came the second night. This time, Daniel was completely sober. He had spent the day working, had a light meal, and gone to bed early, around 11 p.m. Sleep came easily, deep and restorative. Until exactly at 3:17, he checked the digital clock on the nightstand. He awoke with a start. There was no sound that awakened him, just an oppressive sensation of not being alone. And then they began again. The footsteps. More confident this time, less careful. Crossing the living room, occasionally pausing as if the intruder were examining objects. The footsteps were followed by a new sound. Drawers being opened and closed in the kitchen. The clinking of cutlery, water running briefly in the sink. The unknown presence was preparing something to eat. Daniel remained paralyzed in his bed, terror giving way to a sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. It was irrational, impossible. Then came the knocks on his door. No more subtle attempts at the doorknob, but deliberate, rhythmic banging. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. Who's there? Daniel finally found his voice, hoarse with fear. Silence in response. Then 3 more knocks. "I'm calling the police," he shouted, reaching for his phone with trembling hands. The knocking stopped, followed by the sound of footsteps hurriedly moving away up the stairs, returning to the upper floor. With his heart racing, Daniel dialed 911 and whispered into the phone, "There's someone in my house. Someone who shouldn't be here." The operator asked for the address and assured that patrol cars would be sent immediately. Daniel provided the information while trying to control his breathing. His eyes never left the locked door. "Are you in a safe location?" asked the operator. "I'm locked in the basements in my room," he replied. "Stay where you are. Officers are on their way. Do not attempt to confront the intruder." Daniel had no intention whatsoever of leaving the room. In the minutes that followed, the house became silent again, except for the distant hum of his own terror pulsing in his ears. The sirens grew louder, blue and red lights pulsing through the curtains of the upper windows. Daniel heard authoritative voices, the sound of police announcing their presence, knocking on the front door. "I'm down here!" he shouted finally, leaving his room and climbing the stairs to meet the officers. 4 officers had responded to the call. 2 remained with Daniel while the other 2 began a methodical sweep of the house, room by room, weapons drawn. "How long have you noticed someone's presence?" asked an officer as Daniel sat in the kitchen, an untouched cup of tea before him. "Last night was the first time, but I thought I was imagining things. I had been drinking and—" His voice faltered. "But today I'm completely sober. Someone was here walking, opening drawers, knocking on my door." The officer nodded without expressing judgment, taking notes while his partner maintained contact via radio with the team inspecting the house. "Central to Unit 4, the radio crackled. "We need you to come to the master bedroom, 2nd floor." The tone in the officer's voice caught everyone's attention. The officer interviewing Daniel gave him a reassuring look. "Stay here with Officer Williams. I'll check what they found." Minutes passed in tense silence. Daniel could hear muffled voices upstairs, footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved. When the officer returned, his expression had changed. "Mr. Matthews, we found something you need to see." In the master suite, Daniel's parents' bedroom, the officers had moved the double bed away from the wall. They pointed their flashlights at the space between the heavy structure and the floor. "There's someone under there," said the officer, kneeling to better illuminate. "Come out with your hands visible." Daniel watched, unable to fully process what was happening. Then he saw a face emerging from the shadows under the bed. A man of indeterminate age, unshaven, with feverish and frightened eyes, blinking against the sudden light. "It's just a bed," the stranger muttered, crawling out slowly, trembling hands extended as ordered. "It's just a bed to sleep in." The officers quickly immobilized and handcuffed him, leading him out of the room. Daniel remained paralyzed, his brain struggling to reconcile this revelation with the reality he knew. How long was all he could ask when he finally recovered his voice. "Hard to say," replied the more experienced officer. "But considering what we found, maybe weeks." Weeks. The word echoed in Daniel's mind like a distant gong. In the subsequent inspection, the officers discovered disturbing evidence. A small accumulation of crumbs and empty wrappers under the bed, suggesting the man fed himself when the house was empty or when everyone was asleep. An improvised canteen for water, even a small container he used as an emergency toilet, emptied when he had the opportunity. "He knew your routine," explained the officer. "Knew when you left, when you returned, when you slept deeply. Probably observed the house for days before entering." The invader was identified as Thomas Mercer, 43, homeless with a history of untreated mental problems. He had no violent criminal record, Just petty thefts and trespassing. I didn't want to hurt anyone, he repeated as he was led to the patrol car. I just needed a place to stay. The house is too big for so few people. Daniel discovered that Mercer had initially entered through a second-floor window that occasionally remained unlocked, a carelessness his mother often committed to ventilate the room. Once inside, he quickly learned the routines of the house, the schedules, the habits. When the parents traveled, he became bolder, exploring more freely when Daniel went out or slept. "Why did you knock on my door?" Daniel asked. Before the man was taken away, Mercer stared at him with eyes that seemed simultaneously empty and overburdened. "Sometimes it gets lonely," he answered simply. "Just wanted to talk." The response, in its disturbing simplicity, caused Daniel a deeper chill than any threat could have provoked. Due to Mercer's mental state and the absence of violence or significant property damage, Daniel, after consulting his parents by phone, chose not to press formal charges. The man was referred to social services and psychiatric evaluation. That night, after the police departed, Daniel went through each room of the house, checking and reinforcing locks, installing additional latches on the windows. The house he had always known, the environment he considered safe and familiar, now seemed contaminated by an invisible presence that persisted like a stain on the walls. Daniel's parents returned early from their trip, disturbed by the incident. The house was professionally cleaned, locks changed, a security system installed. Practical, rational, comforting measures in their tangibility. Daniel eventually moved to an apartment near campus, citing convenience for his studies. But the truth, which he rarely admitted even to himself, was that he could no longer sleep in that house without waking up startled at every creak of the floorboards, at every shadow that moved on the walls. Thomas Mercer disappeared into the system after a few weeks, like so many others in his situation. Sometimes Daniel wondered where he might be, if he had found another house, another family, another room to silently observe during the night. For this is the true essence of the terror we feel in our own homes. Not the certainty of a malevolent presence, but the persistent doubt, the possibility that we are not as alone as we think. That between the moment we close our eyes and the moment we open them again, someone may be watching, waiting, silently approaching our door. Tonight, as you prepare to sleep in the comfort of your own home, ask yourself, have you checked under the bed? And if you have, did you look carefully enough? Story 3. There exists a primordial fear that dwells in the depths of the human spirit. The fear of being watched when we believe ourselves to be alone. Of all the terrors that haunt us, perhaps none is as intimate as the sensation of invisible eyes following our every movement in the darkness. In the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, where centuries-old sequoias filter light into fragmented patterns and moss covers stones that have never known the touch of sun, there exists a particular quality to the silence. It is not the absence of sound, but a tangible presence that envelops the senses, as if the forest itself were breathing, watching, waiting. In Mount Rainier National Park, Washington, local legends speak of solitary wanderers who disappear without a trace, hunters who return with stories of silhouettes between the trees that correspond to no known animal, climbers who swear they felt observed for days before abandoning their expeditions, overcome by inexplicable dread. Andrew Hayes, a 34-year-old university literature professor, gave no credence to such stories. For him, the forest represented solitude, clarity, a refuge where he could finish his book away from urban distractions. The cabin he rented in December 2019 was situated 17 kilometers from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a winding trail that serpentined between conifers and crystalline streams. A rustic two-bedroom construction with its own generator, wood-burning fireplace, and a porch that projected over a small valley. Perfect isolation for 3 months of concentrated writing. The only luxury was a satellite internet connection, installed by the reluctant owner, who warned about its instability during the region's frequent storms. As he unloaded his belongings, books, manuscripts, supplies for the winter, Andrew felt a profound satisfaction contemplating the green vastness that surrounded him. The air carried the penetrating aroma of pine trees and damp earth. The only sound was the rustling of dry leaves beneath his boots and the occasional distant call of a bird. "This is exactly what I needed," he murmured to himself, not realizing how small and ephemeral his voice sounded in the forest's immensity. Not noticing that, as he pronounced these words, something subtle changed in the quality of the silence around him. The first week transpired in perfect harmony. Andrew established a productive routine, waking with the sunrise, writing until midday, walking around the cabin's vicinity in the early afternoon hours, and returning for a few more hours of work before dinner. The nights were tranquil, marked only by the crackling of the fireplace and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. He slept deeply, lulled by the primordial silence found only far from civilization. On the 8th day, he noticed the first anomaly. Returning from his habitual walk, he stopped a few meters from the cabin, overcome by an inexplicable sensation. Something was different. At first, he couldn't identify what had changed. The cabin appeared exactly as he had left it. Closed door, partially open curtains, thin smoke escaping from the chimney. That's when he realized. The smoke. He had let the fire extinguish completely before leaving. He was certain of this. He approached cautiously, senses heightened. The door remained locked. Upon entering, he found the fireplace lit, flames dancing cheerfully over recently placed logs. The most rational explanation was that he had forgotten to extinguish the fire, and the embers had reignited some piece of wood. But he knew he had extinguished even the last ember, as he meticulously did every afternoon before going out. Someone had entered the cabin during his absence. He checked his belongings, the laptop, the money, the cell phone. Nothing was missing. Nothing seemed out of place except for a persistent sensation that the space had been inhabited by another presence briefly. 3 nights later came the first scratch, a subtle sound, almost imperceptible, against the exterior wall next to the guest bedroom window. Andrew awoke instantly, senses on alert. He remained motionless in bed, listening. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Longer pause. 3 scratches in quick succession. Probably an animal, he muttered to himself, though he knew no animal would produce that deliberate, almost rhythmic pattern. Armed with the fireplace poker, he checked the cabin's exterior the following morning. He found no evident marks on the walls, no footprints in the damp earth around the construction, just some indistinct marks under the window which could have been made by anything. A small animal, a fallen branch, the wind dragging debris. In the days that followed, the noises continued, always during the early morning hours, always near the unoccupied guest bedroom. Scratches evolved into light taps, 3 in sequence like a code. as if someone or something was trying to establish communication. Andrew began keeping a flashlight beside his bed, checking the locks 2-3 times before lying down. His sleep became lighter, interrupted by the slightest noise. In the mornings, he meticulously examined the cabin's exterior, seeking evidence he never found, only subtle, inconclusive indications, insufficient to confirm his growing suspicions. Twice, upon returning from his walks, he found the cabin slightly different, a chair displaced by a few centimeters. A book he was certain he had left closed now marked at a different page. Nothing concrete enough to characterize an invasion, just enough to feed his growing paranoia. In the third week, the isolation began to weigh on Andrew. The internet connection failed during a particularly violent storm, leaving him completely incommunicado. The access road was partially blocked by a fallen tree, making any idea of sudden departure difficult. That's when he began to hear the whispers. Initially, he confused them with the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows, but gradually, they became too distinct to be explained by natural phenomena. Low, indistinct voices, conversing in a language that seemed both familiar and completely alien. The whispers always came from the guest bedroom, always after midnight, always when the moon was hidden by clouds, plunging the forest into an almost tangible darkness. Who's there? Andrew finally confronted the emptiness one night, standing tremulously in the dark hallway, holding the poker like an improvised weapon. "I know someone's here." The whispers ceased instantly. The silence that followed was more disturbing than the noise, dense, vigilant, as if the air itself were listening, evaluating his reaction. That night, he locked the guest bedroom door. A symbolic precaution, he knew, for if something could enter and exit the cabin without leaving traces, a simple lock would not be an impediment. The following morning, he found the bedroom door unlocked and ajar. Andrew began documenting the occurrences. He placed small, imperceptible markers, hairs on door hinges, tiny pieces of paper between book pages, objects in positions meticulously catalogued in his notebook. Each morning he checked his improvised traps, and each morning he found subtle evidence of disturbance. He tried to rationalize. Perhaps he was sleepwalking. Perhaps the isolation was affecting his perception of reality. Perhaps the stress of his deadline was manifesting in ways his conscious mind couldn't adequately process. As a final test, he set up his cell phone to record during the night, strategically positioning it to capture the hallway and the guest bedroom door. On the first attempt, he found the battery strangely drained by morning, with no footage stored. The second attempt, the recording showed only static for hours until, at 3:27 a.m., the image became completely black for exactly 7 minutes and 12 seconds, returning afterward to static, as if nothing had happened. On the third attempt, Andrew positioned the cell phone inside his own room, focused on his bed while he slept. The footage from that night showed something that made him abandon any subsequent attempt at technological documentation. At 2:19 a.m., his bedroom door opened slowly, though it was locked from inside. The footage showed no one entering, but the shadow on the wall, an impossibly elongated humanoid silhouette, extended across the floor to the edge of his bed, where it remained motionless for 23 minutes, before receding and disappearing. When the door silently closed, the rational explanation for such a phenomenon, a peculiar combination of external lights, perhaps a branch swaying against the window, couldn't supplant the visceral terror the image provoked, for there was no external light on that moonless night, and no branch reached that particular window. The breaking point came in the 5th week. Andrew had stopped sleeping adequately, consuming dangerous amounts of coffee to stay awake during the night, only briefly napping during the day, when natural light seemed to offer some protection against whatever inhabited the cabin's shadows. Work on his book had completely stagnated. The pages in his notebook, once filled with notes about his novel, now obsessively documented each unexplained occurrence, each nocturnal noise, each displaced object. His handwriting had become disorderly, occasionally deriving into incomprehensible scribbles when fatigue overtook him. On a particularly dark night, during a storm that violently shook the cabin's windows, Andrew made a decision. He would enter the guest bedroom and confront whatever was there. He armed himself with the poker, a powerful flashlight, and a hunting knife he had found in a kitchen drawer. He positioned himself before the closed bedroom door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I know you're there," he said aloud, surprised by the firmness in his tone. "I'm coming in now." He opened the door with an abrupt movement, illuminating the empty room with the flashlight. The untouched, never-used bed, the small desk against the wall, the built-in closet whose door was slightly ajar. Andrew slowly approached the closet, his trembling hand holding the flashlight, the poker raised in defensive position. With a quick movement, he fully opened the door. Empty. That's when he noticed the window. It was open a few centimeters, allowing wind and raindrops to freely enter. He approached to close it, leaning over the bed. It was then that he saw, outside, partially illuminated by a momentary lightning flash, a face. Not a human face, but something that vaguely resembled human features. Eyes too large, too far apart, without eyebrows, a small, thin mouth, skin too pale, almost translucent under the rain. The face observed him through the glass, impassive, unshakable under the storm that lashed the forest. Andrew screamed, recoiling in a movement so abrupt that he fell onto the bed. When he looked, again the face had disappeared. Only the darkness of the forest stared back at him. Andrew didn't sleep that night. He barricaded himself in his room, pushing the heavy dresser against the door, placing towels in the cracks of the windows. He sat in the center of the bed, surrounded by his improvised weapons, alternately watching the door and the window. The sounds began again around 3 in the morning. No more scratches or subtle taps, but something much more disturbing. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving down the hallway, entering the living room, the kitchen, returning to the hallway. Footsteps that no longer strive to hide their presence. At 5:48 a.m., a new sound, scratching against his own door, not the rhythmic pattern from before, but continuous, persistent like nails or claws, slowly dragging from top to bottom on the wood. Andrew remained paralyzed, cold sweat running down his back, despite the intense cold that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The scratching continued for exactly 17 minutes before abruptly ceasing. The silence that followed was broken only by the first bird of the morning, whose distant song announced dawn. The pale light began to filter through the curtains, bringing with it temporary relief. Andrew acted quickly. He threw his essential possessions into a backpack, cell phone, wallet, some clothes, his laptop with the unfinished manuscript. He tried to call emergency services, but the connection remained inoperative after the storm. He cautiously opened the bedroom door, expecting to find marks in the wood after the prolonged scratching of the night. The surface was intact, perfectly smooth under his trembling fingers. He moved silently through the cabin, noting that everything seemed normal under the morning light. No sign of disturbance, no evidence of the nocturnal presence. Only the guest bedroom window remained open, allowing the cold morning air to circulate freely. As he passed the kitchen table, he noticed something that definitely wasn't there the previous night. A small arrangement of stones stacked in impossible balance, forming a structure that vaguely resembled a humanoid figure. He didn't waste time contemplating its meaning. He hurriedly exited through the front door, not even bothering to lock it, and headed for the trail that led back to civilization. Andrew traveled about 2 kilometers along the muddy trail before realizing he was being followed. There was no sound of footsteps besides his own, no broken branches or disturbed foliage. Just the inexplicable primordial certainty that something was watching him, accompanying his every movement through the trees. He quickened his pace, occasionally slipping on the terrain muddied by the previous night's storm. The sensation of pursuit intensified, manifesting as an almost physical pressure on his nape, as if invisible eyes were piercing his skin. As he rounded a particularly sharp curve in the trail, he glimpsed something from the corner of his eye. Berusimu, a movement between the trees too quick to be clearly identified. Further ahead, another movement, in front of him this time, as if the pursuer were simultaneously behind and ahead of him, surrounding him. Panic took over. Andrew abandoned the trail and ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping his face, stones and roots making him stumble repeatedly. Orientation was completely lost in his desperation. He could be running in circles, could be heading even deeper into the forest, moving away from civilization instead of approaching it. That's when he heard the sound of an engine in the distance, a vehicle on the main road. He directed himself toward the noise, ignoring the scratches of the bushes on his exposed arms, the pain in his leg after a particularly violent fall. The forest began to clear ahead of him, the trees becoming less dense. Through the trunks, he glimpsed the asphalt of the main road. Salvation was just a few dozen meters away. It was at this moment that he saw it clearly for the first time. No longer a peripheral glimpse or a nocturnal silhouette, but a complete figure, standing between 2 ancient sequoias directly in his path. The appearance was vaguely human. Erect posture, 2 arms, 2 legs, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long, too thin, articulated at points that did not correspond to human anatomy. The face, the same one he had seen at the window, seemed incomplete, like a sculpture abandoned before the final definition of its features. Andrew momentarily froze, terror paralyzing his muscles. The creature didn't move, just observed him with those large, empty eyes, too far apart in the pale face. The sound of a horn on the road broke the trance. Andrew circled around the figure in a wide arc, running toward the road as if his life depended on it. And perhaps it did. He emerged at the edge of the asphalt exactly when a forest maintenance truck was passing. He frantically waved, shouting for help. The vehicle stopped a few meters ahead. The forest workers took Andrew to the nearest town, where he reported the incident to local authorities. A team was sent to investigate the cabin, returning with an inconclusive report. No sign of invasion, no evidence of unauthorized presence, beyond an open window that could easily be explained by the storm. The cabin owner confirmed that he occasionally received similar reports from previous guests. Unexplained noises, displaced objects, sensations of presence. but attributed everything to isolation and the sometimes extreme conditions of the forest. "That place does things to people's minds," he casually explained. "The absolute silence, the complete darkness at night, makes you hear and see things that aren't really there." An older officer, native to the region, observed Andrew with a look that seemed to contain deeper knowledge. "There are places in the forest," he said quietly when they were alone, "where the boundary between worlds is thinner, where things that don't belong to our world can occasionally cross over." Andrew never returned to retrieve the belongings he left behind in the cabin. His book remained unfinished, the manuscript eventually archived when other projects took its place. He moved to New York, where the constant noise and perpetual lights of the city offered comfort he would never admit needing. In the following years, he occasionally researched the region, discovering similar accounts scattered across decades. Hikers who felt observed, photographers who captured inexplicable silhouettes between trees in images that should have shown empty landscapes, hunters who swore they had seen creatures that corresponded to no cataloged species. Science offers rational explanations for such phenomena. Pareidolia, the human brain programmed to recognize faces and figures where they don't exist. Psychosis induced by isolation. Hallucinations caused by the mycelium of certain fungi that thrive in ancient forests, releasing spores that affect human perception. Comforting, rational, scientific explanations. Explanations that Andrew repeated to himself on nights when he awoke startled, believing he had heard scratches on his 14th floor window. Explanations that lost strength when, on particularly dark nights, he looked out the window of his apartment and, for a fleeting instant, believed he saw a familiar face observing him from the darkness. Eyes too large, too far apart, without eyebrows, a small thin mouth, skin too pale, almost translucent, reflecting the lights of a city that never sleeps. In ancient forests where time moves differently, and reality folds upon itself in the spaces between centuries-old trees, there are things that wait patiently, things that observe, things that, once having found you, never really let you go completely. There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.